as many in the profession did. It was high school. It was the teenage years. A kid growing up in the 60s in the Midwest. Of course, I was building car models and airplane models, and in suburbia there were houses being built all over the place, so lots of scrap lumber and materials, and started banging things together. So I just got into making stuff. And then, as time went on, started to get upper ranks of high school. It's like, so who are the people who are making cool stuff? And architecture lured me in and has never let me go since. Being raised in St. Louis, the home of Washington University, of course, my father was very excited about me going to WashU. And he tried to sell that as, and you can live at home, which didn't sound like the best idea in the world to me. So I started to look around, and Kansas and Missouri had a reciprocal agreement where kids from Missouri could go to either University of Kansas or Kansas State University for in-state tuition. So I went over to Lawrence with my folks and fell in love with the University of Kansas campus. Following my four-year degree there, I was very much into kind of the practice. And my Fount Smothers, who was kind of my primary instructor at the time, pointed me at University of Michigan, which had a tremendous one of the longest running programs in the country. Graduated in 1975. Those of you with white hair might remember 75 was a year of pretty deep recession, stagflation, all of that stuff going on. And so between my graduation in August and December of that year, I made about 60 contacts with firms all across the country. Most of the time I'd walk into a place and there'd be nobody at the reception desk, and you kind of look around the corner, and back in the drafting room there's three guys with their shirt sleeves rolled up, and the owner kind of perks up and goes, "Can I help you, son?" And it'd be like, "Yeah, well, I'm just wondering if you need any help." It's like, no. So luckily Fount had at that point moved on to be the chair at Louisiana State University and needed somebody to fill in on a sabbatical. So I went and spent a semester teaching introductory design in Baton Rouge. And after that semester, I was then able to go join the faculty at Mississippi State University. The School of Architecture there at Mississippi State had only been stood up about 2 years earlier. So everything was brand new. But we were making traditions every day, because whatever we did, it was the first time it had ever been done there. So we had a great time. Dean McMinn had worked at CRS, the fantastic Caudell, Rowland and Scott firm out of Dallas, and persuaded the folks at CRS to kind of join us as adjunct faculty. So we had our fifth-year students down in Jackson, Mississippi, doing urban stuff, and CRS would send guys over for 3 days a week to work with them. And then we'd go back and forth between Starkville and Jackson with stuff. And so that experience really lit in me kind of an understanding that there's still a hell of a lot more to learn. And since those days, I've really tried every day to learn something new, but also teach something. And I figured out early on that the teaching component is perhaps even more important than the learning component. Because in our industry, we're constantly teaching and mentoring our younger staff, the contractors we work with, obviously, the consultants we work with, and more importantly, our clients. Because everybody knows what we do, right? But nobody really, most laymen, having lived their entire lives in a building, think they can do this stuff. And then once you illustrate for them the fact that, no, there's a lot more that goes into every one of those decisions, they start to begin to appreciate what it is we do. I did some short stints with some small firms, and while those give you a great opportunity for one kind of project, I very early on recognized that I was more of a big firm person. I kind of reveled in the resources that you had available to you, the number of perspectives that you got, and also a lot of the kind of projects that came our way. And so after my stint teaching at Mississippi State, I kind of recognized that staying in academia was not a good long-term option for me. And so I started to look around. And so in '78, I moved to Chicago, which I'd been visiting since I was a small kid, and loved Chicago. It's by far the best large American city. So I eventually, after about 6 months of working with a small firm on a temporary assignment, I was able to get hired on at SOM. Back in the day, we were still at 30 West Monroe, the great inland steel building, one of the greatest office buildings in the world. And that experience was really foundational because I learned the balance between design, practice management, and project management is key to the success for any firm. What I learned there really was the practice management component and the project management, particularly the technical side. They really taught us at SOM how to put buildings together. I was focusing on doing more of the technical stuff and learning that jazz. And I had one old project architect who was like, don't draw more in the morning than you can erase in the afternoon. I mean, this was the olden days of, parallel bars, right? Computers were just starting to permeate into the firms. But one of the great assets that we had at SOM was the microfiche room. So you'd be working away at your desk at a project and working with the job captain or the designer, and they go, this detail, what we're trying to do here is kind of like this other project we did 10 years ago. Go down to the microfiche room and check it out. And so the protocols there were, every time you did a major milestone issue, you would have those drawings microfished and sent off to storage. So you could go down there and look up the entire development of any sheet of drawings in that drawing set, from conceptual design to shop drawings. And so you really learned how to take even the smallest detail and make it sing, make it a beautiful thing. And during that experience at SOM, I really came to realize that the technical balance, the project delivery balance component was really critical to the success of any project. Because over the about 5.5, 6 years that I was with SOM, I saw some great conceptual projects kind of come apart in the development project. And the flip side, I saw some mediocre things through the work of the development team just become brilliant. And so it taught me to really understand that everything we do in the profession is design. But that word design is a really tricky bit of business. About 2002 or so, 2003, while I was on the national board, much later in my career, AIA did one of those kind of behind the scenes, the one-way mirror marketing research campaign. And they brought in owners, contractors, consultants, a whole range of people we ally with to get projects done. And talked about what we do and what were the hang-ups, what kind of things were impediments. And it turns out design, the word design, is really at the crux of the conflicts that then develop over time in a project. Design, is it a noun or is it a verb? Our clients think it's a noun. Architects, we understand it's a verb, right? We always talk about the design process. You can always make it better. There's always that point in the project where you've got to say, that's enough, we've got to get this thing built. And so once that crystallized in my mind, it really helped me understand how to manage clients better. Because they're thinking we're just doing the object. No, it's the whole process there. And so it's broadening your definition of design to understand that it influences your process and what you do and how you do it. I spent 20 years with Art Gensler out of the San Francisco office. And perhaps I learned more from Arthur than anybody else. Art was very clear with all of us. Our job, everybody from the mailroom guy through the receptionist through the principals, is to make our clients' enterprises better. It's not about what we do. It's about how we're going to make their business, their lives, their community better. The other component of it was, if we're not making money, we can't do the right job to service our clients and do the kind of job that we know we can do. So the joke around Gensler always was, count the cash on Friday. One of the great virtues of that environment, where everybody understood what we were doing, was it really fostered a spirit of collaboration between offices. And because I had a number of firm-wide responsibilities on the technical side of the stage, and project delivery and kind of code expertise, regulatory approval stuff, I was often called upon to go to another office and give them a hand to strategize or market or review projects. And what I found just fascinating is I could call any of my partners, just as they could call me, and say, hey, Thursday we're going to be interviewing for this job. We need some help on this, that, and the other thing. Can you come out and help us out? Absolutely. And I do the same thing with them. But I can't tell you the number of times that I would drop into the Houston office or the Chicago office, or I'd get somebody from New York. They'd fly in, we'd spend the evening having dinner in the office and prepping for a marketing proposal the next morning, and things would just go like clockwork. It was unbelievable. Every one of us knew the stories. Every one of us knew how to play off each other in the interview. And it was just a fascinating experience there. The other part that Arthur was great about was recognizing and celebrating the people who actually did the work behind the scenes. And so early on, within the first couple of years of starting the practice, when it was still just 2 or 3 folks, he set up a profit sharing plan for the staff. And then after I was there about 8 years or so, we went to the employee stock option program. So that by the time that I left, the holdings of the employees in the stock option program was about 40% or so, something like that. But also the profit sharing plan continued. So even if you're just the guy who's the most expert at designing and detailing stairs and you've been there for 35 years, you're going to retire with a nice nest egg. Directly after, I went to work with Perkins & Will for about 8 years. And while I was doing some projects, I was mostly working on the corporate side, working to advance the technical performance, the technical standards, and the process that we used to develop projects, as well as Perkins & Will's model of growth is to acquire other firms. And so I spent a fair amount of time, based on my Gensler experience, trying to work with these firms that were brought into the enterprise to try and instill some of the cultural differences that make Perkins & Will what they are. There's a number of them that really stick. When I was with SOM, we did the addition to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Boston. I was a job captain on that one. But the traditions of the old Ritz and the kind of glamour, old school stuff there right on the Boston Garden. But it was adding some ballroom spaces across the alley, fronting on the garden, some hotel rooms and some condos up top, which was, it was a kind of a technical challenge, as well as a design review challenge because of this historic nature. While with Gensler, I did a whole range of things, office buildings, Silicon Valley campuses, things like that. But I tended to specialize around the historic, for several years, the historic preservation and retail stuff around Union Square. I had the privilege of working on pretty much every corner of Union Square. The Nike headquarters, or Nike store there, that's on the northeast corner, was a particularly challenged job because that was a building that was built in the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake. And so during the rush to rebuild, they used a lot of materials that were available as opposed to what was probably the best use of things. So kind low-grade concrete. We're all used to seeing deformed rebar. They had a lot of different shapes and sizes and dimensions of reinforcing that would go in. They'd also use ceramic clay tile to kind of create a bridging structure that then they would pour concrete topping on. So there was a lot of different things like that that created challenges in the new environment. That project was particularly interesting as well because it was a high-rise, quote-unquote high-rise, 75 feet to the top floor, but the steeply sloping site on Stockton Street. So we were able to develop a scheme whereby we were able to insert kind of an extra floor and change the fire department's access to decommission it as a high-rise, which meant that we could go to a single smoke-proof tower, freeing up 120 square feet or so for each of the 6 floors that then became rental space. There's also the Gary Theater, which is just off Union Square. A building that was actually under construction when the 1906 earthquake hit. It was badly damaged in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. And so there what we did was come in and not only deal with the landmark status of the building, but strengthen it seismically so it was safe. We created a new lounge in the upper floors that never existed before. But that was perhaps my most joyful building in that the history of the place, I mean, hair had been performed there and we found remnants of the paint schemes in the lobby and things like that. But bringing that building back into civic life because of the way the front of the house was designed, it had been over the years kind of botched up to kind of be separated from the street. And this new lounge that we created on the upper floors allowed that space to become part of the city again, part of the cityscape and the street life there. And then the San Francisco Jewish Community Center out in the avenues of San Francisco was also a great project because it was creating it was on the site of the existing facility, which had become way outdated, but created a new place there that was reminiscent of what had been there in the past, but created a whole new set of opportunities for the rich cultural heritage to flourish. It was also a great project. As I said, I'd come through the ranks of the technical performance side of things, and having worked in Chicago for 5 years, which had its own unique building code, I'd become quite adept there in terms of the nuance of what the code, not just what the letter of the code was, but understand the intent of the particular provision and building off of that so that you might not be in the letter, but you could convince the building official you were providing the level of safety required. And when I got to San Francisco, the strict interpretations that we were getting from the building department on things kind of got the hair up at the back of my head. Because in some cases, it wasn't actually helping our clients project or achieve the kind of safety that I think we all seek in our projects. The other piece is that the California Environmental Quality Act means that the planning process is also very detailed and very long-term. And then the historic preservation aspects in San Francisco puts a whole nother layer. So I became very adept at understanding that stuff, and trying to influence it kind of became a priority for me. And that's pretty much where I found AIA. Because the AIA San Francisco chapter is about 1,400 members, probably 1,800 today. So it's a large, robust chapter, very active community structure. And so I got involved with the committee there that was trying to influence the building code and the planning code. And building relationships with the building officials, the fire chiefs, all of that kind of stuff. I learned that, yeah, you can influence that. You got to be willing to speak up. You got to be able to compromise. You've got to be able to find that common ground that advances the entire enterprise, what we're trying to do here. And as a result of that engagement, I really came to understand that while we as individual architects have a voice, we can go do that. But to influence these bigger things that create the environment that we work in is really a purview of the AIA. And so as I started working through the committee positions at AIA San Francisco, I also became more keenly aware that as architects, we serve two masters. We've got the public that we have to serve, but also our clients who pay the bill. And sometimes that creates a conflict, and you've got to be able to negotiate that. But I also understood that beyond our professional obligations of the license, we're also small business people. So things like tax policy, particularly things that will impact our client, like the historic tax credits, are things that we need to pay attention to. One of the more peak experiences in my career was following the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco, the Loma Prieta earthquake. For those of you who had been in San Francisco in the years prior to that, during the highway building boom in the 50s and 60s, there had been an effort to link the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge with an elevated freeway along the waterfront, the Embarcadero. Fortunately, there was a big effort in the late 60s to halt that freeway at Broadway Street. So for this southern portion of the waterfront between the Bay Bridge and Broadway, there was this double-decker, 4-lane wide freeway that just stops and drop people back to the ground level. The day the earthquake struck was pretty traumatic. In those days, I was taking the ferry back and forth to Marin County, but getting down to the waterfront and not really realizing that concrete viaduct, the double-decker, had been severely damaged. We're all streaming away under it. And then we get to the docks, and somebody said, hey, look, the traffic was stopped on the Bay Bridge because a portion of it had collapsed, right? And so getting out of town that day on the ferry was kind of life-altering. But as we started to work on the reconstruction efforts, there was a group of 4 other guys, young architects at the time, who had worked together before at one of the other firms and were now in different places that I was working with. And so we came together. Alex Benuti, who was president of AIA San Francisco at the time and a fellow, Tom Lolini, who was the campus architect at UC Berkeley, Clark Mannis, who I was working with at Heller Leak at the time, now Heller Mannis Architects, and then Bruce Race, who was a planner. And the 5 of us kind of got our heads together, and we had all come from the Midwest or the East Coast, and we're lamenting that, you know, the traditions, if you look back at the waterfront in San Francisco, the connection between the waterfront and the city was quite rich and wonderful. And how the freeway had cut all that off and really separated the two. And we started to think about, why rebuild that freeway? Why spend hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild that and perpetuate this division in the city from its heritage and from the beauty of that waterfront? And so we shredded, the 5 of us, and put together some ideas. And Alex, being president of the San Francisco component at that time, and us all being engaged in committees there, we got the component behind it, and we took the show on the road and found ourselves in the mayor's office with when Art Agnos was mayor of San Francisco. And Margie O'Driscoll, who was one of his deputies, was, for the arts, was very much behind it as well. And we sold Mayor Agnos on the idea. And that launched us into about a 6-month effort to sell it across the city. Fortunately, with the mayor's backing, people agreed to it. And it was very trying because people were just excited to try and get things back to normal. And they had not recognized that the commute patterns and the way people traveled had changed. And so what they saw as the auto traffic coming off of the Embarcadero Freeway, feeding Chinatown, feeding North Beach, really had passed. They weren't the big drivers as it was. And there was a lot of technical challenges with dealing with taking that thing out and the infrastructure along the Embarcadero. But staying with it, we were successful in getting that torn down, and as led to other pieces of kind of remnant freeway throughout the city that were removed to try and knit the city back together. So now when you go to the Embarcadero in San Francisco and you see the historic trolley cars running up down there, you can see the ships coming in and out. The whole thing was pretty great. I rose up through the ranks in San Francisco and became more engaged with AI California Council as a result of that leadership. And Paul Welsh, who was the executive director for many years of AICC, was very adept at leading the volunteers. Paul was always the guy who was like, you, as the architect, need to be at this committee hearing or before this panel at the legislature. And so while I was still coming up through the ranks, I remember going to my first AI National convention, not conference, in Boston. And it was at the time that the Presidio complex at the north end of the San Francisco Peninsula was being integrated into the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. And AI San Francisco and California Council had put forth a resolution for the AIA to endorse that process. And for some reason or another, we didn't have a large contingent of San Franciscans at that event. And so at the California caucus, the day of the annual business meeting where we were going to be talking to these resolutions, the president at the time of the California Council was like, so who's going to speak on behalf of the resolution? And I'm just sitting there my first time, I'm just a pup. And Paul just goes, oh, our case from San Francisco, he'll do it. And I was like, who, me? Are you kidding? I'm going to get up in front of, he's like, you got this, you got this. And so with like 15 minutes of prep, I found myself at the mic arguing, in my 2 minutes for passage of this resolution, which was a success. The Presidio is now a wonderful piece of San Francisco's public open spaces. But so from there, I went through the chairs and was president of AI San Francisco in 2000, and then was elected to the executive committee as a vice president for practice at the California Council. Continued to push with the kind of practice management technical side of things, but also engaged in the other pieces of it, which then led to election as regional rep for California Council on the national board. California, having the largest number of architects in the country, has multiple seats at that time on the board. So I was the junior guy, but we also had a long tradition of a number of presidents of the Institute. And so those players kind of took me under the wing and helped me understand the bigger stage that you have, the bigger opportunity to influence the kinds of legislative things that I was talking about, both in terms of the rules as well as the business opportunities, tax credits, and the bigger megaphone you have to make it heard. And at the same time I was doing that, I was also participating, representing Gensler on the International Alliance for Interoperability's board. The IAI was focused on the technology side of stuff, the integration of in the practice of technology, and the need for us to have platforms, BIM or CAD, to communicate across platforms, not just be siloed, which opened up a whole group of software providers that I got to collaborate with and put things together in that venue as well. One day I got a phone call out of the blue from a woman who was working in the office of the chief architect for GSA. And Gertrude Bayerkoff was her name. And so I got on the phone with Gertrude, and she explained that she was working on a committee for the Construction Users Roundtable, which is the big national firms that have multiple sites, multiple projects, and a lot of contractor participation in that group. And they were trying to understand why architects and engineers' drawings were so bad. And so I started to quiz her how she knew, or how they knew as a committee, that the documents were bad. And so, there's cost overruns, budgets bust, schedules, performance issues with materials, all that kind of stuff. And through the course of the conversation, I tried to suss out that, when these things happen, do you experience these other things? Like if you make a major decision to move a department that has different performance requirements across the building, how that might lead to additional cost or delays in the schedule. Or if you insisted that we use a certain material and then it failed to perform, even though you told us to use it, it's still our fault, right? And so I said, look, I don't agree with your premise, but here's what I can do. I can get together architects and engineers who have experience, and you've got, and the software guys, because I'm working with them, and you can bring some owners and some contractors together. And let's do a little workshop. And let's replicate this conversation. And so we did that. There was about 20 people in the room, equally split between the owner contractor side and the design professional software side. And we started having the conversation. And we started going through these various issues. And Patrick McClamey, who was chair of HOK at the time and chair of the International Alliance for Interoperability North America component, did a great job of bringing case studies, brief case studies of 6 projects they had done for governmental entities around the country. 6 of them were design, bid, build. 6 of them were negotiated contracts. And he was able to illustrate for them the differences in terms of budget conformance, schedule conformance, performance, all that kind of stuff. And so after about 2 or 3 hours, suddenly I started to see the lights go on over the contractors and the owners' heads, until finally one of them said, okay, so let me get this straight. You're telling us that the way we're asking you to do your work is creating outcomes we don't want. Yes, exactly the point. And he was like, well, what do we do? I said, we have lunch, and then we explore this. And so out of that conversation in the afternoon then, we were able to come to some conclusions about the way you're asking us to do the work around liability issues means that I can't bring all my knowledge to this conversation, because my practice liability insurance limits me. You're not trusting me in terms of these pieces of information. Contractors' voices are over here. So there's that piece. What formats would allow us to be more engaged? And you bring us budgets that are often unrealistic. There's no way you're going to do it. And you don't want to modify your program to align with your budget, nor increase your budget to get your program. So we need to have more upfront conversations about how do we set the parameters for the exercise, rather just leaping in and then we're going to make it all work out. And at the end of the day, when we as architects succeed, you're going to succeed as a business. And likewise, when you succeed, our success is embedded in that as well. And so the outgrowth of it was, we need to have an environment where we're going to agree not to sue each other. The design professionals are willing to put some skin in the game. I'll put part of my profit at risk to have a seat at the table to help determine the budget. We're going to share information more regularly rather than a weekly project meeting. Let's cohabitate so that I've got the contractor and all the engineers and you right at the table to solve a problem now. And so that was the beginning of the integrated project delivery discussion. I was in the executive committee at AI National at the time, so I was able to bring this discussion to the board, and the board got behind it. And as luck would have it, the chair of the AI Contract Documents Committee at the time was Phil Bernstein. And so I went to Phil and said, look, within the contract documents realm, we need some pieces of the puzzle here to go together to help give our practitioners guidance. And Phil was like, yeah, you're right, I'm on board. And so Phil was able to harness the contract documents crew to come up with the first outline specs and contract templates that could start to guide this conversation. So when I became president of the Institute in 2007, one of the things that I was proud to be able to launch at the time was that first suite of IDP documents. So that's now, widely recognized, widely used. Still skepticism, particularly on the owner side, on some of these things, but the success stories, particularly in the healthcare realm, of projects coming in under budget and under schedule with great performance and happy teams at the end of the job was really gratifying. But the other part, as AI president at the national level, you've got the bully pulpit to advance issues you wish to kind of highlight. And I chose to really use my voice around the sustainability issues. 2006, 2007, we were still in kind of some of the early days with LEED becoming more ubiquitous across the profession. There were a number of opportunities that came up on Capitol Hill to influence policy. But I got to know Ed Masrio. And so working with Ed, trying to help him move some things along to get LEED more cognizant of the energy issues. Because at that time, it was more about designing for low energy use index numbers versus tracking in CBECs what the actual performance was. And so Ed and I had a couple of interesting raucous conversations with LEED leadership about, is it CBECs or is it ANSI? It's like, CBECs, I want performance. I don't care about the talk. I want to see the performance. The energy bill in 2007 was working its way through Congress, and our AI National Advocacy team was able to get some provisions into the bill around the tax credits. Many of us here in Utah take advantage of the 179D tax credit. I had the opportunity to testify both before the House and the Senate subcommittees on energy, and so that's one of my proudest moments, is getting those provisions as part of it. I got to participate in the solar decathlon on the Mall in DC. But the most gratifying component, as wonderful as that was, the two most gratifying components of that year was, one, it was the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Institute. So I focused my time, rather than international travel, was to getting to as many local and state components as I could to help them celebrate the 150th anniversary. And so we had a whole series of events we did. Blueprint for America, which was getting local components to look at what they could do in their community to kind of help set the stage for the next 150 years of their community. We did a national survey of America's favorite buildings. Surprisingly, the Empire State Building came out on top as the #1 building. And so I wrote a letter to the ownership there congratulating them on that. And they said, well, next time you're in New York, come on, we'll go through the building. I was in New York and went over there, and you come in the front door, they have a big showcase, trophy case there. And there was my letter blown up to poster size. I was like, holy mackerel. But all the way up, all the way down through the building with them, which was pretty exciting. So for me, the real drop the mic moment was for our 2007 convention in San Antonio. There were a lot of great things about that. One of the things was the investiture of the new class of the college's fellows. We did it in front of the Alamo at sundown, which was pretty spectacular. But it was the last day of the convention. That, for me, was the highlight. As I said, I was looking to push the sustainability issues as far as I could and bring as much light to it. And so with the two folks, Gwen and Carl, who were kind of my co-chairs of the conference, looking at the business side and the education side, brainstorming, so who our speakers would be. And I was like, Al Gore. I want Al Gore. We talked to our friends at McGraw-Hill and Arc Record, and they were like, yeah, we can cover that fee. We can take care of this. So it was now, how do we get to Gore? And going through the speakers bureaus, his office, all that kind of stuff, we really were having a hard time making the connection. But Gwen's mom was a Chautauqua person. And so one day, Gwen gave me a call and she said, I was just on the phone with my mom. She's at Chautauqua and Al Gore's there. I said, Gore's there? She's got to go get him. And she's like, yeah, I think I can make that happen. So he called her mom back and said, we want him to speak at our event. We need to get in front of him. And so the next day, Gwen calls me back and it's like, it worked. She went and ran Al Gore down, said, my daughter's an architect. They're doing this thing on sustainability. They really want you to come. And he turned to his assistant and said, let's talk to these people. And that's how we made the connection. We struck a deal and he was on board. We announced it. And as in many things around the sustainability issues, there's some polarization. And for every one of that's great. It's excited to see Gore there. I got two, I'm never coming to convention again. How can you politicize the AIA? How can you politicize architecture? You know, I'm dropping my membership, which was a little disheartening. But I tried to keep a good face on it, and I tried to say, we'll miss you. You can come back anytime. But the day of, it was quite exciting because the CEO at the time and I were able to spend a couple of hours with him over lunch, kind of talking about things that were going on. He was also very adamant that he wanted to spend time with the students, the student organization. And so he departed to go spend a little time with them, and we went down with him, sat in, and it was great because the AIAS president at the time had kind of said, look, here's this forum of 50 students. Do you want to just chat, or I've got some questions we could ask? And Gore was great. He was like, I want to hear what your questions are. And so he's having this conversation with him. And my phone starts going off with texts because the fire marshal was very concerned about how many people we were going to have in the room. So they were counting very carefully who was coming in. So they'd held everybody outside the room and weren't letting people in. And it was starting to get a little angry. So I excused myself up there to try and help move things ahead. So we finally did, and we packed the room at 3,000. Not everybody was able to get in. I'm just like, wow, what's going to happen? And so he starts with his kind of stump speech that I'd seen on YouTube, which is hilarious. I mean, he doesn't get as much credit for his humor as he should, in my opinion. But then as his talk went on, some of the things that he and I had talked about at lunch started to come through. He was listening. Kind of adding in that color of, I know you guys are doing this, but we can take it here. And so he was putting a challenge out to us. And I was so happy. I mean, I had tears in my eyes. It was that kind of a moving thing for me, having organized this whole deal. But then about 2/3 of the way in, I mean, the audience was just jacked up. They were going crazy. And I was like, oh my God, now I'm going to have to go back out there and wrap this thing up. It's like, oh, okay. So my comments I had written as in anticipation were going to be challenging. I'm not exactly shy about being a provocateur, and that was my intention. And so he wrapped up, and I went out and thanked him, and then I proceeded to close the convention with my comments, and I challenged the people in the room to go back to their practices, not to business as usual, but with a new perspective on what the potential of architecture is and what we can do, not just around building context, building history. I mean, we're leaving the artifacts of our culture. And that's, an important piece to do. But also, it was our goal to help save the planet. And so, having done my part, I left the stage and started to look at what's next. Just to continue to mentor, continue to try and learn and teach every day, and do what I can to bring us all along to a better preferred future. The first thing is, it's not about you. It's about the good you can do and should do with the skills and gifts that you've been given. It's about the people who are going to inhabit whatever buildings you put together, and also the people that just walk by on the street. You're creating context. You're creating history. It's about getting things done. So learn to build buildings. Learn what makes them tick. Learn building science. Know how to make a better building. And then I think it's about celebrating the human condition. Just recognize that what you're doing is going to have a ripple effect for 60, 70 years. That building's going to be there. So don't take it lightly. Don't think it's a folly, because 2 generations from now, somebody else is going to be inhabiting that space. But get your license, get your license, get your license. One of the things to recognize is that according to NCARB, we're 120,000 architects in the country. How many lawyers are there in the country? I don't think the ratio looks good for us. Get your license and build things that help people. It's not all about you. It's not about you. It's about what you leave behind. So think about those people, particularly that coming up behind you, and how you mentor them and help them to understand what they can do and should do as an architect.